friends, I'm Nadine Brandes, the author of Fox, Romanov, and the Out of Time series, and it's time for another drafting video. If you missed the first drafting video, I am sharing an in-depth look behind my writing process as I draft a brand new story, a young adult standalone, and I'm sharing that process from start, hopefully to finish. So the first video, which I will link to down below, is telling how I set up to start writing a new idea, where my ideas come from, how I know how to start, and all of that. This drafting video is an update on how it's going. I have passed the 10,000 word mark, and so I will be sharing in this video my tips on how to introduce a story and what you need in your intro of a story, and what my rhythm or my system and just my mindset is behind the intro of a story. I also talk a little bit about facing doubts and anxieties about whether or not my writing is good enough, and I'm also going to cover some character development. So all of that is going to be in this video. These videos originate on my Instagram at Nadine Brandes, which means that I film them in a vertical video because it starts on my Instagram, but I share them here on my YouTube. Number one, for all of my YouTube followers, but also so that there's an easier place for people to find and rewatch them or pause them or whatever you want to do. So with that, here is my second drafting video, the intro, the first 10,000 words of a new novel. Hello friends, I'm coming to you with another drafting video. I figured it's time to give you an update on how my writing has been going. This is drafting 2, and what prompted this update is that I passed 10,000 words in my current work in progress, which I've been calling Wishtress, and that's not the title, that's just kind of the placeholder for now. So hitting that 10,000 word mark in a manuscript always feels really significant to me because then it feels like the story is officially started. The intro of a story has to be really, really solid before I can move on and write the rest of the book. And I consider the intro to be kind of those first 10,000 words. Intros take me a lot of time. I tend to write them a lot slower because I'm constantly tweaking and I'm constantly going back to try and add certain things and make sure that it's tight enough to be able to support the entire story. So I thought that I would talk a little bit about intros because I've had some questions from you guys about starting a story, where to start, how to start. So I thought I would share how I start and things that I try to focus on when I'm working on the introduction of a story. So first of all, even though I am writing this book by hand, which here's all the writing so far. It doesn't look like 10,000 words when I do it like that, but it's actually more than 10,000 words. I've had several of you ask, what do I aim for in a word count for a story? For the most part, it really depends on what genre you are writing. So this current book that I'm working on is a fantasy, probably a standalone. I don't really know until I finish the story. With fantasy, those books tend to be a little bit longer. So I try to shoot for somewhere around 70 to 80,000 words because when I am then editing after the first draft is done, I usually add somewhere between 10 to 20,000 words to the manuscript. So if I shoot for an 80,000 word first draft, then that means it'll be about 100,000 words by the time I finish. I say that, but my books have never met whatever word count I had as a goal when I started writing them. They're always longer than I initially set out to write. So that's really a very general ballpark. And the reason I do that is because let's say I'm reaching the 50,000 word mark and I'm at the end of my story. I'll realize, okay, some things are missing. This isn't enough for a fantasy book because a fantasy book is typically longer. So it kind of makes me check in on myself to make sure that, oh, okay, I'm at 80,000 words and I haven't even started the big climactic ending yet. That's a problem. So several of you asked what's too long, what's too short. It really depends on the genre. Contemporary YA is typically a lot shorter than fantasy. So somewhere around 70,000 words. So it depends on the genre. I'm not the person to answer this for you because my books are always too long. Personally, when I'm writing a first draft, word counts do not matter at this point. What matters is the story, and are you putting in the story all of the elements that it needs to have? Because if word count is your goal, that's quantity, not quality. And you really need to be focusing on what needs to be in that story as you write it, and write the story how it needs to be written, and then look at word count later. If it's too short, you can see where you can add stuff. If it's too long, maybe that means that you can split it into a sequel. But length is something that an agent or publisher would address with you if you decide to go the traditional publishing route. Or it's something that you can address for your own novel, but I think it's most important to focus on what the story needs first before focusing on word count. That's my personal opinion. That is how I approach my drafting, which is why I write by hand, so that I can't keep track of the word count, except for the intro, where I have typed up everything that I've written in this notebook so far so that I could kind of know where I was at and gauge how the intro is going. So, introductions. The things that I focus on when I'm working on the intro, a big one is the first line. First line is huge for me. If it doesn't feel right to the story, I cannot move on. And that may just be me, but I love writing first lines, but I also hate when I'm having a hard time getting the right first line. For Wistress, it really took me a long time to figure out how to start the story. And when you're thinking about how and where to start the story, you want to think about what is most engaging to the reader. That is like the golden rule as you're writing an intro. Engage your reader. Because if your reader is not engaged, they're not going to keep on reading. So your intro is basically what makes somebody decide to continue reading your book or decide to purchase your book. They're really, really important. There's a lot that needs to be in an intro, and there's a lot that can be done wrong in an intro. So what I try to do with my intros is connect you to the character as quickly as I can. And that's done through emotions. It's done through showing what the character's dreams are, what their fears are, what they're kind of up against, because those are things that we relate to. Even if we don't share the exact same fear or goals as a character, we can understand them and we can empathize as a reader. And I am firmly convinced that every single YA book is actually a character-driven novel. Whether the author is a character-driven writer, we readers want to connect with the character, and that's what keeps us reading. I think that a book can have a weak plot, but if it has strong characters, a reader will still keep reading and still love it. Whereas if you have weak characters that a reader can never connect with, that is more detrimental to your story than a weak plot, because they're more likely to put the book down. So when I'm starting a story, I really try to get into the character's head and get into the character's goals so that there's something on an emotional level for a reader to connect with. I also make sure in that intro to hint toward a bigger plot, because if I'm just spending the first 10,000 words letting you get to know my character, but there's no hint toward a bigger story, that's kind of boring, because the reader is reading to know, well, what's next? Why should I care? Whether they're actually thinking about that question or not, every reader is asking that question somewhere inside their head or their heart. Why should I care? Why should I care about Katniss Everdeen? Why should I care about the Hunger Games? Why should I care about Harry Potter? And we learn really quickly why we should care about them, because we learn what they're fighting for. We learn the situation that they're living in, and that emotionally connects us to them. I could talk for a really long time about this. So, connecting emotionally to the main point of view character, hinting toward a bigger story. So that could mean showing what's the big problem, or hinting toward a bigger problem, and how that connects to the character. So it has to still be personal to them. It can't just be like, there's this war going on, but your character isn't involved at all and doesn't even know about it and doesn't even care. Because then they feel disconnected. And when your reader's connected to the character, they want to be connected to what the character is connected to. So you want your character to be connected to the plot. Does that make sense? Lastly, what I try to make sure happens in the intro is that I slowly introduce the story world. So if there's a magic system, I want to introduce that. If there's political intrigue, I want to introduce that. Basically, making that world come alive. Like when Harry goes into Diagon Alley. Oh, I love that chapter. But sharing that world through the character's eyes. So I don't have a set structure to how I do the story world. I know that there are a lot of books that talk about like the inciting incident that makes your character decide to go onto the journey and all of these different things. And I think those definitely have their place, but I don't use a formula. There are just things that I know have to be in the intro of a story for it to be engaging to a reader. My approach will not work for everybody, whether as a writer or as a reader. So something that you should know about my books is that the intros of my books are very hit and miss for my readers. I have a lot of readers who say they connected instantly with the beginning of my book, A Time to Die, or with Fox, or with Romanov. They were just instantly engaged, instantly connected, and I love hearing that. But some of the most frequent feedback that I see is that several readers have a hard time getting into my books from the beginning. But somewhere around the middle, they start getting more engaged and they typically like the ending. I've always thought about that feedback, how some readers connect instantaneously with my characters and they're engaged from line one. And then so many other readers say, this book had a slow start, which shows me how diverse my readers are. That's just how the bookworm community is. That's how the reading community is. That doesn't discourage me. I just find it so interesting that for some it can be super engaging and for some it can feel slow. So keep in mind, if you are a reader of my books and you think that my intros are a little bit slow for you, my system and everything that I'm talking about may not be a great fit for you. And that's something that we authors need to be okay with, is understanding that people connect differently at different points with your story. My style isn't typically starting in the middle of a battle scene or starting in the middle of an explosion. My style is usually more focused on the character and their situation and then how the plot changes after I've introduced that. And that's what I like to write. That's what I like as a reader. And I have several readers who love that. And so that's kind of what I stick with because that's what I love. But that doesn't stop me from trying new things and seeing how those work with the story. So with this particular story, I am actually writing from two different points of view, which I have never done before in a published novel. The first story that I ever wrote when I was a teenager had like 9 different points of view, which I do not recommend when they're all crammed into one story. Reason being, it makes it hard for the reader to know who to connect with. So I'm writing 2 different points of view in Wishtress. One is a male, one is a female. And so all of this feels very new to me because now I feel like I have to do 2 separate intros and they both have to be just as engaging and still contain all of those other elements that I try to put in a regular intro, but I have to do it in both points of view. So it's been really fun because I feel like I nailed down their intros and I'm so pleased with them. I don't actually know which point of view I'm going to start the book with because I don't know which intro I love more, but I've also never written a book in just 2 points of view. So this is a very new process for me. I'm not sure what's going to work and what's not going to work right now. It feels like whatever I'm doing is working, but I may hit the middle of the story and realize it's not working and have to go back and edit. So something that I'm doing specifically with this is I've gotten the intro chapter for the male's point of view, but that's the only chapter that I've written for him. And I've written 3 or 4 chapters in the female's point of view because I want to just write her story as far as I can. And then I want to write the male point of view story as far as I can, and then figure out where their chapters interrupt each other. I think this will help me make sure that each of them has a fluid story with a good story arc, and I'm not totally pulling myself out of the girl's point of view to go into the guy's point of view and then pulling myself out of his point of view to write in her point of view. I'm able to stay focused on the character that I'm writing right now. These 2 characters are very, very intertwined with seasons. So the female character, her story, her personality, her narrative is drawn very much from the season of winter and cold and ice and everything having to do with winter. Which is why every time it snows here, I have to write because I get new descriptions from what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling, what I'm smelling, and they all go into her point of view. The male character, he is written much more from the inspiration and the season of springtime. So when spring comes this year, I'm going to switch from writing the female's point of view to writing the male's point of view because I feel like if I'm writing their point of view in the season that affects their character the most. I'm getting accurate descriptions. I'm getting more inspiration for that. And I'm just having so much fun doing this. It's little things like this that make me love to write. Just figuring out how I can connect that creativity, imagination, and art with real life, with nature. So I'm having a lot of fun. So that's a little insight into where I'm at with writing Wishtras. And once I have the intro down in a book, next like 30 to 40,000 words tend to come a bit faster. That doesn't mean they come out good, but they tend to come faster because the groundwork is laid. And then later I go back and edit them, or I beef them up with more descriptions, or I tweak them and fix them to make sure that they flow with the story. So right now, first draft, I'm shooting for about 80,000 words. I'm at 10,000 words, and I'll come to you with an update later about how the writing is going as I'm entering the middle of the story. One more thing that I wanted to address was a question that I get a lot, and that is, how do I manage the doubts and anxieties about whether or not my writing is good enough? And that is a battle that every author continues to fight through their entire career. I don't believe I will ever be at a point where I am free of the doubts and anxieties. I don't know any author out there, even the very, very successful ones, depending on how you define success, who feel like they never struggle with the doubts and anxieties. So the way that I handle doubts and anxieties is constantly reminding myself why I write. Many of you guys know that faith plays a huge part in my life, and especially in my writing journey. I love Jesus Christ, and I honestly would not be writing without him and without his inspiration and guidance. And I feel like there are just so many miracle stories in my publishing journey that are so clearly his hand in this love of the art of writing that I have. I draw most of my confidence from that relationship that I have, and I'm constantly reminding myself that I'm writing because I love it, because I enjoy the story. I have a story and characters that I am passionate about, that I want to tell. And as I start writing it, that's when the doubts tend to come in, like, well, what if people don't like this? What if your publisher doesn't like this? What if readers think your intro is too slow? What if nobody connects with your main character? What if they think she's annoying? Which is feedback that I've gotten a lot for certain characters. And anytime those doubts start to creep in, I instantly stop and have to remind myself, and sometimes I do this through prayer, sometimes I do this through journaling, or I'll put like a quote or bullet points up on my wall. I stop and remind myself, hey, why am I writing this story? And the drafting process, you are writing that story for yourself, for your own joy. Yes, when I'm on deadline, it's a lot harder to cling to that because I am also having to write it for a publisher and for readers, and I know that that's coming. But when I'm writing a first draft, it's for me, and it's okay if it's going to be sloppy and it's not going to come out right. I have to put faith in the editing process, knowing that I can go back and tweak it. So many times when I'm writing, I stop and I verbally out loud say to myself, nobody needs to know, Nadine. Nobody needs to know how awful that sentence was. Nobody needs to know how cheesy that little romance interaction was. Nobody needs to know, because no one is reading it except for me. And I like it. I like the cheesiness, or I like the cliche that I just wrote in. And those are things that I can address later in editing. But nobody needs to know how awful this first draft is, because you don't have to let anybody read it. I don't let anyone read my first drafts because it's not finished yet. There's so much more that I can do to fix this book. So I'm constantly telling myself why I write, and that's because I love the process. I love the process with my faith combined in it. For me, it's a journey of community with Christ, which maybe sounds cheesy, but when I'm writing, I always start with prayer. I pray for the words to come. I pray for just a calmness in my heart. I pray for inspiration. And it's a journey where I feel like my relationship is growing deeper with Christ as I write, because He's the ultimate creator who gave us the gift of creativity, and then I get to be creative. And so it's like we get to connect through this shared passion. And again, I know that this isn't for everybody, but this is my journey, and this is how I write. And I'm telling you, it really, really helps me get past those doubts and anxieties, is knowing that the end goal of writing this book is not a published book. It's not a big advance. It's not seeing my book on the shelf. The end goal of writing this book, this first draft, is the joy of writing it. The process is the joy. And so that's something that I'm constantly retelling myself, just words of affirmation that I love to write. This is my story. Nobody needs to know its weaknesses. I get to enjoy it as I write with this process. There's nobody judging it except for myself, and I'm going to try and set that judgment aside. So that is kind of how I address the doubts and anxieties. Some days are easier than others. Particularly when I am on a deadline, it's very easy to feel like this is the worst thing I've ever written. My readers are going to hate me. They're all going to leave me because I've just disappointed everybody. I'm very much a people pleaser. And so I think for me, because I'm a people pleaser, if I set aside the expectations that other people might have and I tell myself, well, there's nobody to please except for me, that helps me write through a first draft. So it really starts with kind of understanding what those doubts are that are coming into your mind, and then addressing them one by one and being consistent and understanding that, okay, you're going to have to fight this doubt again and again and again, but you can beat it. You can beat it. You can defeat it for that day. And the next day you can too. You are made to create this story. And remembering that the story that is in your head, absolutely nobody else can tell. Nobody else can write that story. Even if someone has what sounds like the exact same idea as you guys are going to write completely different stories. So take comfort in the fact that this story is unique to you and your imagination, and nobody else could have come up with it, and nobody else is going to write it the way that you can write it. So, okay, I'll get off my soapbox. Maybe I should revisit this in another completely separate video, because this is about to hijack the entire drafting video. But I hope that that's helpful. All I can do is share how I tackle these things. Several authors that I know tackle doubts and insecurities in different ways that work for them. Community is a big part. I have several author friends that I'm able to turn to when I'm feeling really down, and they encourage me. And there's so much encouragement to be found through community. So there is also that aspect of it. I'm very, very thankful for this community. Okay, that's all I have for you. That's that. Thanks for watching my drafting video, my second drafting video. If you have any questions at all, please leave them down in the comments so that I can either address them in a future video or I can address them in the comments. I will do my best. So please put any specific questions that you have. And as always, if you want to keep up on my videos where I talk writing, publishing, and all of the bookish things, please click subscribe or the little bell icon that gives you an email alert every time I post a new video. Tally ho!